Folks, we are joined by Thompson in this episode. He is the founder of Optimize, addresses critical talent challenges that organizations face, focusing on finding and retaining talent while fostering innovation. Optimize is founded on the belief, substantiated through observation, that addressing these challenges requires a deep understanding and accommodation of diverse thinking styles. Its mission with Optimize is to provide solutions that enhance neuroinclusion, aiding organizations in hiring untapped talent, creating more inclusive workplaces, and harnessing the power of true diversity of thought. And as we prepare to delve into our conversation on the topic at hand, neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, and why does it matter to businesses? Here's an exciting twist. First, let us tickle the brain of our guest. So, Ed, get ready for a rapid fire round of random words. I'll mention a few, and I would love to hear the first thing that comes to your mind in response without thinking much. If you're ready, let's dive in. Okay, let me fire the first word. Curiosity.
Books.
Invention.
Brain.
Future.
Climate.
Book.
Dickens.
Movie.
James Bond.
Food.
Apple crumble.
Aliens.
Unknown.
Creativity.
People.
Universe.
Mind bending.
And the last one is leadership.
Team building.
Perfect. Thank you so much for participating in the first rapid fire round so sportively. And there is one more waiting towards the end of the episode. And folks, welcome to the Guiding Voice podcast series, where we embark on transformative conversations for a better future. I'm your host, Naveen Samala, dedicated to making the world a better place through valuable discussions that add value not only to your life, but also to your career. And thank you so much for tuning in. Here, hearty welcome to the Guiding Voice, and super excited to have you today as a guest and talk on this most important topic, neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to drive this conversation. In fact, I've been waiting for this episode to happen ever since I had a conversation with one of my friends, Devi Shobha, because she has launched a summit recently. I think you were one of the panel speakers there, and before that also we have been talking about this topic, but I didn't find many experts, and you are the first one to discuss this topic on the Guiding Voice platform, and I'm super excited. So Ed, let's get into the conversation and get the ball rolling. Let's start with your success mantra. So please share with us the top 3 things that have attributed to your success so far.
Well, I think I and Optimize, our company, we've had a pretty strong vision. So that's going to be the first vision, where organizations take this topic far more seriously. A vision where people really feel comfortable talking about some of these differences, and it's a normal thing. It's a good thing to do that. And so I think that vision is probably the first one. Of course, that didn't happen overnight. So I'll give you 2 that sort of complement that. I think patience and determination as well. A real belief that this is the right vision, a vision that's going to make the world a better place, going to make businesses more effective. A determination to drive towards it, and so a patience. And we've been doing this for 6-7 years now. And I can tell you, when we started, there's a handful of companies, I mean, literally fewer than that which I could count on one hand in the world, who cared about this topic. Now that's changed a lot.
Yeah.
But that needs some patience to see that fruit.
So kudos to your efforts, and also congratulations to you and the entire Optimize team for working on a cause which actually leads to inclusive workplaces and inclusive world. And I really appreciate and I salute you and your team. So keep up the great work. It needs a lot of passion, commitment, and most importantly, perseverance, right? So I think you guys have been doing amazing, and I wish you all the best on your future endeavors. So on that note, you said, okay, it's been like 6 to 7 years ago, and before, at that time, you had only handful of companies which have embraced this particular concept, and I'm sure that must have led to a lot of toughest lessons, right? So please share with us the top 3 or a few toughest lessons that you have learned as an entrepreneur.
Well, I think I can relate to what I said before, that things don't always happen on your own timescale. And especially with something like this, where there is really a world kind of awareness curve building on this topic. To some extent, and conversations like we're having today help to accelerate that, I think. But to some extent, you can't perfectly control that. And I think I'm the kind of person who, especially in business, I want to sort of do everything today. And sometimes I think you have to understand that there's a longer time scale here, and really to start thinking about that longer scale, really embracing it. And actually, just as an aside, I mean, I recently read the biography of the guy who founded Walmart in the US, and I like business books, and it was fascinating. And this is somebody who did this, 60, 70 years ago, whatever it was. He had this incredible kind of long-term thinking, which is very un-21st century, where we think of business as being kind of, it's all got to happen now or next year or it's too late. He wasn't doing that. And he was really thinking about, how do they build? So I think that's a good lesson. Another one is, look, because of our mission, we have always attracted people who are very passionate about this topic. That's great. But sometimes it doesn't always work out with good people who are well motivated. And that's kind of where I go back to the team building thing. There's no shortage of people who are talented and who are passionate about this topic. For us, we're a small company. It's just, it's about just having the right people in the right spots as we grow. So I think that's been another lesson as well.
Mm-hmm. Impressive. And you are able to beat all those odds and now are making good progress. And Ed, let's now start with today's topic, that is more about the neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. So can you explain to our audience what does neurodiversity and neuroinclusion mean? So maybe you can explain them in a layman terms, if I may call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll do it with a sort of view to the workplace, which is where we focus. So neurodiversity means, in a sense, what it sounds like is that humans have different brains. There is no one normal brain. Everybody's brain is different. That's what neurodiversity means. That's just a fact of humanity. And what that means is every team is neurodiverse, in that it's not one brain shared by half the team. Everyone in the team thinks differently. Everyone in the team experiences the world differently, processes information differently, is going to have different preferences of how they like to work, how they like to organize their work, how they like to problem solve, how they like to communicate. That's just going to be a fact of any team. If you don't believe that and you're a manager, start asking your team about those things, and you'll see it come to life. So every team, every organization is neurodiverse. That's a fact. Now, what's happened at work is that we haven't been talking about this. And because we haven't been talking about it, we end up with norms. So we end up with the norm, for example, of an open plan office, or norm that we use a lot of interviews to assess candidates. Those are things that work for lots of people, but they don't work for everybody. And those norms can particularly disadvantage people such as autistic people, dyslexic people, people who have ADHD and so on, people who have a particular sense of shared characteristics and experience within that bigger human neurodiverse world, people who can have particularly strong preferences when it comes to how they work, how they problem solve, how they communicate, and people who can find that some of those norms serve to exclude them. So that's neurodiversity. That's also neurodivergence. Divergent is that sort of collective adjective for people who consider themselves to have some of those minority, what we call neuro-identities. Neuroinclusion, really for neurodiversity inclusion, is how do we change this? How do we make sure every brain is included and accommodated for?
Wow. That's so clear. And I must admit, I got to know about this neurodiversity through my friend. I was mentioning about Devi Shobha Chandramouli, who has organized this inclusion summit recently. I have a curious question, like, why are we talking about neurodiversity now? Why not a few decades ago? Again, in case if it has already started a few decades ago, probably that's my ignorance, but this is straight from my heart.
Well, I think it's a wonderful question. And it's not just about a few decades. I mean, it is a reality of humans, and humans have been collaborating for thousands of years. Why now? I think it is a fascinating question. I think there's a few reasons for it. If we go back to the last really 100 or so years, possibly 150, a lot of these brain differences started being noticed and then categorized by the medical profession. So a lot of those neurodivergent identities came about through the medical profession defining, okay, here are people, and it was always done through negatives. Here are people who struggle with some of these things, and we're going to give them a label. There was always less attention to some of the positive flip sides of those thinking styles. And what happened in the late 20th century, particularly the 1990s, as the internet evolved and brought people connectivity, is you had a movement of neurodivergent people online talking with each other, essentially saying the world doesn't understand people like us. And actually, we need, as humans, to reframe how we think about neurodivergence, and we need to promote, and the term was coined by observing these chat rooms at the time. Ultimately, it became about, we need to understand this idea of human neurodiversity. We all have different brains, autistic brains, and so on, exist within that wider reality. And we need to reframe how we think about neurodivergent people. Neurodivergent people are not broken. They're not broken against sort of norm. They're just different, their own strengths, and so on. So that movement, I think we have to give credit for, because that movement is where a lot of these ideas came from. And of course, there's been a neurodiversity advocacy movement ever since. So I think that they deserve a lot of credit for why we're talking about this now. But I think there's factors as well. I think more people being diagnosed has raised the understanding and appreciation of how many people are neurodivergent, and current guesses are it might be 20% of people are neurodivergent in some way. I think social media as well has given neurodivergent voices a lot of prominence, particularly when very famous and successful people will say on social media that they are neurodivergent. And of course, they may have faced challenges, but often they'll say that their brain wiring has been a crucial ingredient of their success. And I think the last thing is we're talking about the workplace, the employer context, if you like, where I think organizations have been struggling to find talent. Most talent surveys the last 10 years will tell you that. The lifespan of companies is plummeting given the pace of change and innovation. So there's this pressure within businesses to find solutions to that. How do we attract talent? How do we keep them around? How do we get the best out of them? How do we innovate? These priorities that to some extent used to be HR priorities really today are CEO priorities. And I think that's also played into this interest and attention towards neurodiversity over the last 5 years or so.
That is very clear, Ed. And you are a strong advocate for neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. And in fact, you and your organization is focusing on that. Now, educate us in terms of how businesses or organizations benefit from a more neurodiverse workforce.
Well, I think I alluded to it just then, and I can build on it. Really, it's about fulfilling the talent goals that they already have. You're not giving organizations new goals. You look at what organizations care about. They care about keeping people around, so they talk about well-being, belonging, and so on. But to some extent, that's because there's been a retention crisis within certainly the corporate world over the last few years. I think it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4 here in the US. Corporate employees will leave voluntarily every year. That costs a lot of money to replace. So that is a major goal. And if you look at reasons why people leave work, of course, sometimes it's retirement or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's, I don't feel understood. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like people value my ideas. I don't think my manager understands me. A lot of the things that we hear from neurodivergent people in, again, what is a very big community. So not saying that's everybody, but I think we can point to that. Certainly when we've interviewed neurodivergent professionals, we found many of them have experienced low sense of well-being, a low sense of belonging, and we've worked with organizations to help change that, help people feel proud of the organization that they're working in, and see a benefit there around retention. Obviously, teams are also looking at, or leaders are also looking to things like productivity and innovation. So that's the kind of collaboration, the ways of working piece of neurodiversity. Now, it's not difficult to understand that if our teams are neurodiverse and people have different brains, and yet we've never been talking about that, we've probably not optimized their potential. So I'm always excited about neurodiversity and awareness of neurodiversity, really creating a different kind of team. A team where we can talk about and surface some of these differences. We don't have to talk about labels. We don't have to say, are you autistic or I'm dyslexic, whatever. We can just talk about some of the different preferences we have in terms of how we work, preferences that relate to how our brains work. And we've seen team productivity improve. We've seen neurodivergent people particularly bring productivity and high performance to their teams. And we've seen examples of organizations harnessing different kinds of brains to solve challenges. So that's your productivity and innovation piece. And then, of course, and I deliberately left it last because I don't think it's necessarily as important as the others, but there is the piece of accessing talent. Mm-hmm. Not that it's not important, but I think sometimes people think because their perspective of neurodivergent people is of sort of young job seekers, I think people think that, you know, we don't have people like that already, and how do we go and get them? Actually, again, teams are neurodiverse anyway, with typically many neurodivergent people. But accessing talent, I think, is a big one. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Organizations struggle with that. And a lot of the time, I think they can struggle with it partly because they are unintentionally excluding people who think differently. So I know we've talked today a little bit about hiring. There's lots of ways that can be changed, so we can just open up that talent funnel for the 100% and not just the 80%.
Yeah. A while ago, you mentioned that these people may be leaving the organizations within a span of 1 year. That could be one challenge. Again, could be because of various reasons. Maybe their voices are not heard, or they're not treated well, or they're not listened to. It could be anything. So now let's talk about how to do this neuro-inclusion well, and where it can go wrong when it comes to hiring, communication, and also well-being.
Yeah, it's a huge question. I think it goes wrong. I mean, it either doesn't happen or it goes wrong right at the beginning with the misconceptions people have about this topic. Mm-hmm. I think you have to start there. There's misconceptions people have that are, for example, we don't have anybody like that here. So their misconception is that neurodiversity equals autism, and their misconception is because nobody's openly disclosing that they have an entirely what we would call neurotypical team, which is almost certainly complete fantasy. Sadly, 90% of neurodivergent people typically disclose at work, partly because of those misconceptions and the problematic cultural context that they may be disclosing into. Mm-hmm. If you are disclosing into a world, whereas we find with our surveys, maybe about 60% of people don't know what neurodiversity is, not difficult to think how you might conclude, well, actually, that's a bit of a risk. I'm just going to keep quiet and I'm going to pretend to be neurotypical, much as that's a huge stress on my mental health and my productivity and so on. It's preferable sometimes to sharing this and fearing that you're going to be judged, fearing that people aren't going to know how to respond. So those misconceptions can be problematic. I think they can stop people disclosing. They can also stop action being taken because there's a misconception that everything's fine, right? And sadly, with this topic, and we've found this with interviewing neurodivergent people, a lot of the problems are shouldered by those individuals. The organization missing out on talent. They might not necessarily know this is why, but the person who finds that they're interviewed by people who clearly don't know anything about neurodiversity and who punish them for slightly atypical body language or whatever, that's something that they're shouldering. The person who's having to mask at work and pretend to be neurotypical, that's a burden that they're shouldering. And occasionally it bubbles up, and occasionally there were some lawsuits recently in the UK of employers being sued and in fact being sued successfully for not supporting neurodivergent employees. Sometimes neurodivergent employees will openly say that they're leaving because they don't feel that they've been included. But a lot of the time, this stuff is kind of existing below the surface, sadly, for the people who are having to shoulder that. So I think that misconception that this isn't really anything to do with us is a huge one that stops things going well. And I'll talk about another one. I think there's a misconception that neurodiversity only means autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and so on. And to some extent, it only means, or the inclusion of it only means when somebody puts their hand up and says, "Hello, I'm autistic." That's when, okay, now there's loads of things we need to change and to be inclusive. And again, there's lots of problems with that. There's the fact that, again, humans are neurodiverse. So, lots of people have different traits, different thinking styles that we can better accommodate if we are a little bit more proactive. Again, 90% of people don't disclose. So if we're waiting only for people to put their hand up and say, "Hi, I'm dyslexic and I need some support," we're talking probably 10% max of the people we could potentially support. What we find at Optimize is we have to be a little bit more proactive than that. We have to, and if this is where it goes, and we talk about how to do it well, we really have to build awareness, and we have to build some tactical competency for people, and then in tech and process as well, really off the bat. So let's commit to, look, we know our team is neurodiverse. In a sense, it doesn't matter exactly who's who or who's willing to share what. Let's make an effort to embrace this. Let's make an effort, all of us, to learn that we all think differently. And that's a context where people feel more comfortable. That's a context where everybody can receive proactive support. It's not reliant on disclosure. And then eventually, if somebody does have a very specific need or preference, it's a much more positive context to share with a colleague or manager and say, "Actually, look, I know the company's really, enthusiastic about neurodiversity. Well, I haven't told you this, but I'm dyspraxic, and here's something I'd like you to do with the spreadsheet we work on that would make my life easier." It's just going to make those conversations more successful, I think.
Yeah. I think it's not just about hiring, but we have to sustain, right? That is the most important thing. And
and you have people who are neurodivergent in your team anyway. You have a neurodiverse team anyway.
Yeah, and organizations should also commit by spirit, not just by letter, and just don't do it because I need to tick that particular mark. Okay, I need to include somebody from this particular sect or segment to be part of that, right? Then it won't work. All right, so Ed, now let's talk about some strategies for neuro-inclusive hiring, since you support organizations in that aspect, right? So could you share certain strategies for on this particular topic?
Yeah, let me take a couple to start with. One is a little bit more at the organizational level, and one is more at the maybe hiring manager level.
Yeah.
At the organizational level, we often hear neurodivergent professionals say that they don't see employers advertise their enthusiasm for this topic. that they'll see organizations say we want to be really diverse, want to be really inclusive. They'll rarely see any mention of neurodiversity or, we welcome people with different thinking styles, that sort of messaging. And I think that sort of messaging, obviously, if grounded in fact, can be very powerful in attracting people who may otherwise think, do they really want people like me? Do they really understand or care about people like me? So that's the first one. And the second one, at a more hiring manager level or recruiter level, is really being intentional. Now, that idea of intentional hiring is something that's a big topic in the hiring community in general today. I think rightly so. I think it's incredibly important when it comes to neuro-inclusive hiring. So what's meant by that is when you're hiring, really stopping and thinking about what are the specific outcomes the role should be generating, and then what are the skills, what's the experience that is likely to enable somebody to achieve those outcomes. If we do that, we can then start thinking quite scientifically about assessment. So, okay, well, if these are the skills we want, how are we going to assess those? Let's not necessarily just rely on verbal interviews if the skills we're looking for are significantly, in another direction. Maybe we'll use an interview as part of this, but it's not going to be the only thing. It also helps us avoid what happens a lot, which is just the reusing of old job descriptions that, may have requirements in them that aren't really needed for the skills and experience profile that we've now defined. And more literal thinkers might look at some of those and think, well, okay, well, that's not really me, so I'm not going to apply. So we can unintentionally exclude people like that. So that's a sort of foundational piece for the organization and then for hiring managers. Of course, then something like interviews, very important that people are trained, people are aware of neurodiversity. Interviewers can check some of their biases, are able to ask questions effectively, and so on. And that's some of the stuff that we train.
Got it. And yet, can you also talk about a few companies who have done very well in this space in terms of hiring neurodivergent people and also being treated as a neuro-inclusive organization, kind of?
Yes, a few. I think Microsoft have been a pioneer specifically of hiring and have done a lot of work there and made some interesting innovations to some of their hiring processes for that program. And I've always liked some of the stuff they've done around connecting with neurodivergent applicants. I think they've really made an effort to provide candidate connectivity in different formats, for example. Dedicated emails for candidates who are just kind of curious about some of the opportunities they have. We work with some organizations that have maybe done this a bit more holistically as well. And so I would mention IBM. Now, IBM have a very long history of disability inclusion, pretty good evidence that at least one of IBM's founders was neurodivergent himself. One of the things they've done very well, I think, is really empower their internal neurodivergent community. The program is led by a representative of that community. The training that we provide is one of the many resources they offer. So it's a very kind of rounded support. I think what that ends up with is the commitment to neurodiversity at IBM just being very clear. And one more, Salesforce, I think a great company in this field, very, very strong on accessibility, disability, and now neurodiversity inclusion as well. Again, a very empowered internal community. I think there's really a good sense that Salesforce, that they're on a journey with this topic, that they don't expect to be experts on day one, but it's a long-term commitment to being as inclusive as they possibly can and ultimately leaving no stone unturned on that journey. And I give them a lot of credit for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing these amazing insights. And it's time for us to add some more excitement and some more fun to the episode. So I would like to bring in the second rapid fire questions. If you are ready, let's go ahead. Okay, let me fire the first bullet out of the second rapid fire round, Ed. If you could have one gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say?
I think it would, of course, I'm going to promote the idea of neurodiversity. So I think it would be, let's say, Times Square, take over Times Square. I think it would have a lot of different pictures of people and brains, and it would say something like, we all think differently.
Wow. Superb. And what is one thing you are really bad at that you wish you were good or better at?
This could be a podcast in itself, you know, if we went through all of these things. Many things. I'm going to say taking vacations. Hopeless, and I wish I took more breaks. I think it's important, but that's not one of my strengths.
Yeah, I think it is very important to have that particular break. Okay.
Switch off, yeah, recharge.
Yeah, and I wish you good luck in 2024. Please describe yourself in just one word.
Curious.
And what is your favorite thing about living in the current exciting times, the 21st century?
Well, as an English person living in the US, it's probably connectivity. Look at the conversation we're having today. I think the ability to be based anywhere and yet maintain connectivity with the business world and with your family and friends, absolutely huge for me. So I think I'm going to go with that. The fact that, you know, my birthday yesterday and I get lots of, you know, messages, and, you know, I can connect with people even though I'm on the other side of the world.
Yeah,
that's great.
I agree with you. And let's move forward to the next one. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Well, I mean, I suppose there's probably a better one I could think of here about, you know, what impact it could make on the world. But a selfish one, kind of similar reasons, probably be teleportation. If I could drop myself back in South London, at the drop of a hat, that would be quite handy.
And last one for the rapid fire, what is one fantasy gadget or an electronic gadget that you would like to see or invent yourself?
Well, I don't know. You could probably do this. It's a bit of a vague answer, but it would be great to have. I'm not great at kind of organizing my photos. You know, I get a new phone and I lose half my photos, and, you know, it'd be great to kind of have something where, you know, you had more of kind of like a memory bank, and you could really kind of just build this kind of deep memory bank of everything you've done in one place, which I feel like modern technology sort of does, but doesn't make that easy.
Interesting one. I think that's a great idea. In fact, somebody can pick it up as a startup idea as well. And
it's just there's so many devices and so many tools, and, you know, we end up having something here and something there, and
right. It happens with me as well. Like some of them are on iCloud, some of them are on Google Cloud. Like we get bombarded with all these things, and we can't be on a single platform, okay, where everything is consolidated. That's the problem with so many tools available, right? So yeah, I think we need one tool. Perfect. So that's a great rapid fire. Let's flip back to the mainstream. And Ed, what will be your one piece of advice to those aspiring to make big in their careers?
Well, first of all, I would say, what does you know, making big in your career mean? If you're just thinking about making money, I would say, in my experience, nothing makes you happier than social impact. And I think the experience as well of some of my friends, making an impact in the world is something that gives you a sense of satisfaction and purpose every day. So I would question, or I would encourage you to question, what are your aspirations, and why are they your aspirations, and are they aspirations that you really want to commit to? And I think whatever they are, seeing everything as a learning opportunity is really important. Particularly early in your career. Don't beat yourself up if you're not where you want to be immediately. The key thing is you're learning. Even if you take a job, you do it for a couple of years and you learn that you don't want to do anything like that ever again, that's helpful. So build on that, see it as a learning opportunity, and do something different.
Amazing. Actually, it has reminisced my own stuff, like the guiding voice. Though I haven't monetized yet, the kind of impact, right, that is actually propelling me move forward. And it gives me immense satisfaction, because at times I get messages from our community members saying that, hey, this particular conversation was helpful, it was an eye opener, and my perspective changed, or I was able to get into my dream job, right? Those things will give you immense kick, right? Which money may not be able to give, but money will follow eventually, as long as we are able to create an impact. Yeah, such a powerful note. Yet, I think you have authored a book on neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, a hidden force. So, could you talk to our audience about the book, and where can they buy?
Yes, absolutely. The book is called A Hidden Force: Unlocking the Potential of Neurodiversity at Work. It's really everything that I've learned and feel passionate about when it comes to neurodiversity at work, in business. That's kind of the focus. It really looks to answer questions that I've been aware I didn't know the answer to not long ago. And I think everybody does need to know the answer to, what is this? We talked about this a little bit today, but I really tried to bring in lots of different neurodivergent voices to give people a sense of what's it like to have a slightly less common thinking style, the strengths of that as well, and some of the barriers that people can face at work. Why are we talking about it now? I go into a little bit more detail, a little bit more history around neurodiversity as a human thing, and why it's only the 21st century where we're starting to embrace that. And then crucially, and we really just touched on we're just touching on this today, what can you do? What can you do as a colleague? What can you do as a manager to be more neuroinclusive? And then how can you bring this topic to your organization? If you're one of the first people to realize how important this is, how can you start advocating for it in your organization? So it's deliberately accessible. It's something that I want everybody to read, everybody with an interest in doing better business to read, and then have some actionable takeaways from.
Excellent, Ed, and thank you so much for sharing that. And for those of you who have tuned into this episode, you'll find the link to Ed Thompson's book, A Hidden Force. It is available in the show notes, so please grab a copy and get his wisdom directly. And I wish you all the best in terms of driving this neurodiversity and neuroinclusion workforce. And Ed, thank you once again for sharing the details about the book. And Ed, how is your experience being hosted on the Guiding Voice platform?
Been great. Yeah, thank you for having me. And totally what you just described resonate with me. I think it's in the end quite addictive to see if you are having an impact in the world, however small. It's something that you want to see more and more of, and can become, and I think should become, a guiding light in your career, not just building personal wealth.
Absolutely, concur with you, and thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you once again for being part of the show and sharing amazing insights by spending your valuable time with us. And looking forward to having you again in future on the Guiding Voice platform.
Thank you.
So, friends, that was our episode with Ed Thompson, who is the founder of Optimize. And before we jump into the fun trivia section, we have a quick request. If you haven't already subscribed to the Guiding Voice podcast, please subscribe, because subscribing keeps you updated on new episodes. And also, if you have enjoyed this conversation and found it beneficial, please share with at least 3 of your friends or colleagues who would also like the Guiding Voice, and spread the knowledge and help others grow just like you. It also helps us create more content for you and our growing community. So now let's hop into the trivia segment of today's episode. So today's trivia is about some least known facts about neurodiversity, and I would give you some information which will complement what Ed has already shared with us. So first one is origins in autism advocacy. Neurodiversity was initially developed by the autism community, particularly autistic individuals themselves. It asserts that autism is not a disorder, but a natural neurological variation in humans. And second one is about strengths-based perspective. Neurodiversity emphasizes the strengths and abilities of neurodivergent individuals, focusing on their assets rather than just their challenges. And this perspective promotes the idea that neurodiversity can be an asset in various contexts. And third is neurodiversity in art and culture. Neurodivergent individuals often excel in creative fields, and their unique perspectives can lead to groundbreaking art, literature, and cultural contributions. And some neurodivergent artists and authors are gaining recognition for their work, highlighting the creative potential within neurodiversity. So that's it from my side, from the neurodiversity and neuroinclusion perspective. And now I would love to hear from you. What are some of the strategies that are working for you or within your organization with regard to neurodiversity and neuroinclusive hiring? Please let me know. And also, if you are aware of any other facts related to neurodiversity, please have them come through. If you are watching it on YouTube, you can comment there directly. Or if you have found this episode on some social media platform, you can comment there as well. I'm going to review them for sure. That's it for today's episode. And thank you so much for tuning in and also for being part of our awesome TGV community. Folks, we would love to hear from you. So do not hesitate to share your ideas, feedback, topic recommendations, and also guest speaker suggestions either through social media platforms, or you can also email me at theguidingvoiceforyou@gmail.com. So let's create content that resonates with you. I'm your host, Naveen Samala, a lifelong learner, and my goal is to have impactful conversations that not only improve your life, but also your career. Stay connected as we journey together. And until next time, take care, stay inspired, and remember, the future holds great things because the best is yet to come. Goodbye for now. Take care and see you all in the next episode with another amazing guest.